I have carried this secret in my heart for so long that I thought it would bury me alive. Today I finally open my mouth not because it is easy, but because silence has nearly destroyed me. My name is Margaret. I am a woman, a mother, a grandmother. But for 15 years I was also something else. Something I never chose to be. For 15 years, I endured an abuse I didn't want but I accepted because I thought I had no other choice. It was my son who abused me. No, not the boy I gave birth to, not the child who carried my blood in his veins. But the boy I raised as my own. The boy I fed, clothed, and nurtured after marrying a man who already had a child from his first marriage. When I walked into that marriage I thought I was saving a broken family. I thought I was giving love to a child who had lost his mother. Instead, I unknowingly invited a storm into my life that would rage for years and leave scars I will never be able to erase. The first time it happened I was shocked. My stepson, the boy I called son, raised his voice against me in a way no child ever should. He had grown into a young man by then and his father was often away for work. I tried to be patient, to guide him with kindness, but patience soon became silence and silence soon became submission. At first the abuse was words, sharp, cruel, demeaning. You're nothing. You're not even my real mother. His voice carried the venom of years of resentment. I told myself it was grief speaking. I told myself he was hurting and I needed to love him harder. But love didn't cure him. Love became his weapon. He realized that I cared too much, that I was willing to sacrifice my dignity for peace. And so he pushed further. From insults, to controlling what I did, to raising his hands against me. The day he slapped me I looked into his eyes and saw not a son, but a stranger. For years I hid it. I smiled in public, served food at family gatherings and sat in church pews with my head bowed, while behind closed doors I was a prisoner in my own home. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, spiritual. He mocked me, drained me, controlled me. And the worst part? His father, my husband, refused to see it. Whenever I tried to speak, my husband would silence me. He's just a boy. Be patient. A boy. He was a man tearing me apart piece by piece. But I stayed. Why? Because society had taught me that a good wife endures. That a mother sacrifices. That silence is better than shame. So I endured. 15 years. Do you know what it means to carry pain for that long? To wake up every morning knowing you will be insulted, diminished, perhaps struck, and still get up to cook breakfast? It means forgetting the sound of your own laughter. It means questioning your worth until you believe you are worthless. It means looking at yourself in the mirror and not recognizing the woman staring back. For 15 years I told myself I deserved it. That perhaps I wasn't good enough. That maybe this was God's punishment for my past mistakes. And so I accepted it. Not willingly, but because I thought acceptance was survival. But one day something shifted. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting in my parlor folding clothes when I heard laughter outside. It was my grandchildren playing. Their voices were light, pure, filled with joy. For a moment I envied them. I envied their freedom, their innocence. And then it hit me, what story would I leave behind for them? Would I teach them that silence is strength? That abuse is love? That a woman's duty is to accept pain quietly? The thought struck me harder than any blow I had ever received. I realized in that moment that I could no longer live like this. Not because I suddenly found courage for myself, but because I wanted something better for them. I wanted my grandchildren to see me not as a broken woman but as a fighter. Dear listener, do you see how silence can become a chain? How endurance, when misplaced, turns into slavery. For 15 years I believed I was strong because I endured. But endurance is not the same as love. Endurance is not the same as peace. And endurance without change only prolongs pain. I know there are women out there listening to me now who are living the same way I did. You think keeping quiet will protect your family. You think accepting pain will bring peace. But hear me, silence does not protect. It destroys. The first step I took was the hardest. I spoke. I told my husband the full truth. Not half of it. Not the watered-down version. The truth. He didn't believe me at first, but this time I didn't back down. I told him I would rather leave the house with nothing than continue to be treated like nothing. For the first time in years I felt power in my voice. Did my son change immediately? No. Did my husband suddenly become my defender? No. But something more important happened. I changed. And that was the beginning of everything. When I finally spoke out, I expected freedom to rush in like fresh air through an open window. but instead the walls around me seemed to grow taller. My husband looked at me as if I were the enemy. "Margaret," he said, shaking his head, "you want to tear this family apart with your words. Stop exaggerating. He's my son." Those 4 words, "he's my son," cut me deeper than any insult ever could. Was I not his wife? Had I not given years of loyalty, sacrifice, and devotion? Did I not carry his name, bear his burdens, and honor him through every season? Yet when it came to choosing between me and his son, he turned his face away. I felt betrayed not once but twice, by a son who misused me and by a husband who refused to defend me. Speaking up didn't bring immediate relief. Instead, it isolated me further. My husband grew distant, barely speaking to me. My children, confused and influenced by whispers, treated me with pity instead of support. And my abuser? He grew bolder. He mocked me openly now. "Go ahead, tell them all. Nobody will believe you." His laughter rang in my ears like a curse. He was right. For a while nobody did. The weight of disbelief is heavier than silence. To cry out for help and watch people turn away is to feel invisible in your own home. Dear friend, have you ever been unheard? Have you ever gathered the last ounce of courage to speak, only to be silenced by those who should love you most? It is a kind of death. Not of the body but of the spirit. I wanted to crawl back into silence. To retreat, to pretend again. But something inside me, that voice that woke up when I heard my grandchildren laughing, refused to be buried again. I told myself, even if the world does not believe me, I will believe me. And that must be enough. I began to take small steps. The first was prayer. Not the quiet, desperate muttering I had practiced for years, but real prayer, bold, honest, tear-stained conversations with God. I told him my truth even when no one else listened. Then came boundaries. I refused to allow my son into my personal space without challenge. I refused to accept his insults without standing my ground. My voice shook, yes, but I still spoke. And slowly, something remarkable happened. He realized I was no longer afraid. He still tried, oh yes. He still hurled words, still raised his hand once or twice. But each time I stood taller, even if I was trembling inside. One Sunday I did something unthinkable. I told my story in church. Not the full detail, but enough. Enough for people to understand that I had been living under abuse in my own home. The whispers began immediately. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with judgment. But do you know what happened next? A woman approached me after service. She held my hand tightly, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Me too." That was the first time I realized I was not alone. That was the first time shame lost a little of its power. Viewers, this is the power of speaking. You think your voice will isolate you, but sometimes it sets others free. Silence hides wounds, but speech reveals them, and revealed wounds can heal. I thought I was alone in my pain. But the moment I opened my mouth, I discovered a community of women who had endured similar storms. My voice became their courage, and their courage became my strength. Of course, not everyone supported me. Some accused me of dishonoring my husband's household. Some told me to be patient, to endure for peace. Peace. There is no peace in silence. There is no peace in slavery. For years I thought peace meant absence of conflict. But true peace is freedom from fear. That was when I realized, I wasn't fighting my son anymore. I was fighting generations of silence, culture, and expectations that told women like me to bow our heads and accept. It came to a point where I had to choose. Continue living in the house that suffocated me or walk away with nothing but my dignity. I chose to walk away. One morning I packed a small bag. I told my husband I was leaving. His eyes widened in shock. "Margaret, where will you go? You have nothing." I looked him in the eye, and for the first time in 15 years my voice was steady. "I have myself. And that is enough." I walked out. I did not know where I was going, but I knew I could no longer stay. At first I stayed with a distant cousin. She welcomed me with open arms. It wasn't easy. I had no income, no savings of my own, no plan. But I had something I had not felt in years. Safety. From there I began rebuilding. Slowly, painfully, but surely. I found small jobs to keep myself afloat. I joined a support group of women who had survived domestic abuse. I cried with them, prayed with them, healed with them. And as I grew stronger, something else happened. My children, one by one, began to see the truth. They saw the courage it took for me to walk away. They saw the change in my eyes, the freedom in my voice. And slowly they turned their backs on the lies they had been told and embraced me again. Dear friends, freedom is never easy. It is costly. It demands sacrifice. But it is always worth it. I lost a home, a marriage, years of silence, but I gained myself. And that is the greatest victory of all. When I left that house, I thought the hardest part was over. But healing, I soon discovered, was not a destination. It was a journey, one filled with shadows of the past, but also with glimpses of light I had long forgotten. The nights were the hardest. In the quiet of my cousin's spare room, memories attacked me. His voice still echoed in my ears, his insults still rang like chains around my neck. Sometimes I jolted awake, sweating, terrified that I was still in that prison of silence. But each morning the sun rose. And with each sunrise I whispered to myself, I survived. I started with the simplest act, breathing. Do you know how strange it feels to breathe freely after years of suffocation? For 15 years, every breath I took was measured by fear, by what would happen if I spoke too loudly, laughed too freely, or even walked too confidently. Now in that tiny room I opened the window and let fresh air fill my lungs. And for the first time in years I realized I was alive. Truly alive. Healing began there, with one breath at a time. One of the most powerful moments of my journey came when I joined a support group. Women of all ages sat in a circle sharing their stories. At first I was too ashamed to speak. My voice cracked as I introduced myself. But then I listened, really listened. Each woman carried her own storm. Some from husbands, some from partners, some from children they trusted. Different stories but the same wounds. And for the first time in 15 years I did not feel alone. When it was my turn to share, my hands trembled. My voice broke. But when I finished they clapped softly, some with tears in their eyes. One woman leaned over and whispered, "You are stronger than you think." Those words became my anchor. Dear listener, healing begins with truth. Not the truth others want to hear, but the truth you've buried inside yourself. When you finally speak it, even if your voice shakes, you reclaim power over your story. My children were slow to return to me. At first they believed the lies, the whispers that I was exaggerating, that I left because I was weak. But time has a way of revealing truth. They saw me standing on my own, working small jobs, surviving without bitterness. They saw the peace in my eyes, the quiet strength that replaced years of silence. One by one they came back. The first was my daughter Grace. She came to see me on a rainy evening. She stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." We embraced, and in that moment years of distance melted away. Later my sons followed. They admitted they didn't understand before, but now they saw. They saw the woman I had become. My heart swelled with gratitude. I had lost so much, but I had not lost them forever. The more I spoke, the stronger I became. I began to share my story in women's gatherings, in church groups, even in schools. At first it felt strange, exposing wounds so raw. But each time I spoke, another woman's eyes lit up with recognition. Another life found courage. And then I understood. My story was not just mine. It was a weapon against silence. It was a torch for others lost in darkness. Viewers, never underestimate the power of your story. What you think is shame may become someone else's survival guide. Do not let pain silence you. Turn your scars into testimonies. One day, unexpectedly, my husband came to see me. His hair looked grayer, his shoulders stooped lower. He sat in front of me, eyes filled with regret. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I was blind. I chose silence over you. I chose my son over my wife. And now I have lost both." Tears welled in my eyes, but I stayed silent. "I cannot undo the years," he continued, "but I beg for your forgiveness." I looked at him for a long time. Forgiveness is not easy. It is not forgetting. It is choosing to release the grip of bitterness, not for their sake but for your own. So I forgave him, not because he deserved it but because I needed peace. It was then that I fully understood. I was no longer the broken woman who lived in fear. I was Margaret, a survivor, a mother, a grandmother, a voice for the silenced. The years I lost could never be recovered. But the years ahead, they were mine to claim. My dear friends, healing is not the absence of scars. Healing is the ability to look at your scars and see strength instead of shame. I endured 15 years of pain. I accepted what I did not want. But one day I realized, acceptance of abuse is not love. And endurance, when misplaced, is destruction. Today I am free. Not because my past disappeared, but because I refused to let it define my future. It has been years since I walked away from that house. Years since I shed the skin of silence and began living as a free woman. Sometimes when I sit quietly in my parlor, I think of those 15 years. I wonder how I survived, how I carried pain so heavy without collapsing. But then I remember I did collapse many times. I broke many times. The miracle is not that I was unbroken, but that I rose again every time I fell. And now, when I look into the eyes of my grandchildren, I no longer see shame staring back at me. I see strength. I see a woman who endured, who fought back, who reclaimed her name. The turning point of my story was not when the abuse stopped. It was not even when I left. The real turning point was when I realized I deserved better. Realization is powerful. It is like a candle lit in a dark room. The darkness does not vanish all at once, but the moment light enters, the darkness begins to retreat. When I realized that I was worthy of love, of respect, of peace, everything changed. My circumstances did not change overnight, but my spirit did. And that was enough to set me free. These days I spend my time differently. I speak to women in small gatherings. I share my story not to reopen wounds, but to show that wounds can heal. I write in journals, pouring out the words I once swallowed. I laugh with my grandchildren without fear that someone will silence me. And sometimes I sit in silence, but this silence is different. It is no longer the silence of suppression. It is the silence of peace. My dear listener, do you know the difference between silence that destroys and silence that heals? Silence that destroys is when your lips are shut but your heart is screaming. Silence that heals is when your heart is calm, and your lips rest because peace has already spoken. I lived in the first kind of silence for 15 years. Today I live in the second. If I could gather all my pain into lessons, they would be these. 1. Endurance is not love. Do not let anyone convince you that suffering quietly is proof of strength. Real strength is knowing when to walk away. 2. Secrets protect the abuser, not the abused. As long as you hide, you empower the one who hurts you. The moment you speak, you take your power back. 3. You're not alone. Pain isolates, but truth connects. When I shared my story, I found a community of survivors. And that community saved me. Forgiveness is for you. I forgave my husband not because he earned it, but because bitterness was poisoning me. Forgiveness was the medicine I needed. 5. Freedom begins in the mind. Long before I left physically, I left mentally. I chose to believe I was worthy. And that belief carried me into a new life. If you are listening to my story tonight and you are living in silence, hear me. You do not deserve to live in chains. You do not deserve to be diminished, mocked, or broken. You deserve to laugh without fear, to speak without trembling, to live without apology. Your abuser is not your destiny. Your silence is not your identity. You are more. You are worthy. You are strong. I have told my story not for pity but for power, your power. If my voice reached your heart, then I beg you, do not keep living in silence. Speak. Choose yourself. Because endurance is not the same as love. And silence is not the same as peace. This is why we created this space. Nana's Hidden Stories. Here, the truths that others bury are brought to light. Here, every hidden pain finds a voice. Here, your story matters. So I invite you. Subscribe to Nana's Hidden Stories today. Not just to hear my voice, but to join a family of survivors, of listeners, of fighters. Because one day it may be your story that saves another life.